So, Eytan, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's great to be back here again.
Yes, it's good to see you again, and we have a lot to talk about, a lot of developments.
We do. We do. The pace of events in our part of the world, well, it always moves fast, but today especially, I think is moving faster than ever.
Yeah, it's almost like when you listen to a podcast or read an audiobook and you set it to 1.6 speed or 2.0
At least.
It's like Israel and
At
the
least.
Middle East part. Everything's happening super quick.
If you look at the Middle East, if you go back 2.5 years to before the Hamas terror attacks on October the 7th, 2023, I don't think anybody could have predicted what would have happened in that period of time. I mean, it is so fast, so dramatic, almost in every country and every front, and it shows no signs of slowing down either. It really is, on steroids.
It's almost escalating, right?
Well, it's escalating in the hope that the escalation will result in de-escalation. Sometimes you have to escalate in order to de-escalate. And we hope that once all this comes to an end, that we'll be in a much safer Middle East, with a very different Iran and different relations within the Middle East. That's an ongoing process. But sometimes, yes, things have to escalate to de-escalate.
Yeah, we're going to get into that, obviously. Yeah. But first, it's like, is it almost like it's difficult to remember what Israel was before 7th of October? Is there almost like, for you, like a line in the sand there is like one Israel, one Middle East pre-October 7th and another one after?
I don't know about... Obviously, the changes are fundamental and touch everything in the region. I think what October the 7th did for many of us is, if we had any naivety about the capabilities and the intentions of our enemies, then that stripped away any remaining naivety of what those terrorist organizations are capable of, the depths to which they are capable of reaching. These are really new depths. If we thought we'd seen everything in the Middle East, and Israel has been through a few wars in our relatively short history, but this was a new level of brutality that I don't think anybody certainly didn't expect or thought that it could meet us on our doorstep and in our communities. So that's the first major impact. And then, of course, everything that's happened in the region since. October the 7th, its consequences and impact will continue going for a very long time. It is a watershed moment. And you don't know where the end of that process will be.
Is it almost like, as if we can speak about a post-October 7th world, almost? It's like a different kind of world that we're seeing?
I think so. And at every new incident and every new operation or war or escalation, it's kind of a new chapter. But yes, October the 7th, perhaps it just led to things unraveling a lot quicker and in a very dramatic way, in ways that few people could have expected. And really, you can look at it everywhere, whether it's Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, the Houthis in Yemen, the United States, of course. Everything is interconnected. Russia, Ukraine is very connected to what's happening in Iran today. And I think things are just becoming clearer where everybody stands and the threats that different organizations pose. Today we see it far clearer than ever before.
Let's talk about what happened now. Is it like 20 days ago that Israel and the US had a joint operation against Iran? And impressive, I think, the operation that you did. And we're going to get into that, also the reception it has had, of course, in the world, in Norway, of course. But I think it was impressive what you did there. And I think it was important that you did it, especially with regards to nuclear weapons. You can't have, not only Israel, but the world can't have an Iran with nuclear weapons. How much of that was in the decision-making for Israel in regards to going to a war against Iran was the point of these nuclear weapons? How much of it was because of that?
Well, that is really the essence of it. There are three well-defined goals of this operation. One is to remove Iran's nuclear capabilities, which are not civilian in any way. Its ballistic missile capabilities, and also to establish the conditions for the Iranian people, should they wish and should they act, to finally get rid of this regime which has made their life a nightmare, and they've been suppressed for almost 5 decades. But yes, that imminent nuclear threat is critical. It's why we acted also in June 2025, and it's why we're acting today. We've seen in these last 3 weeks or so how dangerous the Iranian regime is. Of course, to Israel, to the Middle East, and further, Europe as well is certainly involved. Its impact geopolitically with energy in the Hormuz Straits and elsewhere. Imagine that Iran, not just with ballistic missiles and with drones and its other forces, but also with a nuclear warhead attached to those ballistic missiles. Then the world is in an even more dangerous place. And perhaps that nuclear weapon would ultimately, it would be, the address is Israel, but it's something that the entire world would feel the impact of.
Do you think Iran would have used it if they were to be able to have operational nuclear weapons? If, let's say, nobody had intervened now and they were able to work in peace on these nuclear weapons, do you think they would have used it once they had it?
Well, I think in our part of the world, in the Middle East, you have to listen to what your enemies say. And for almost 5 decades, the Iranians, we should call it the Islamic regime. It's not the Iranian people, of course. It's this regime which has made the Iranian people's life a nightmare for many decades. They've been talking about their ambition to wipe Israel off the map. Should they have a nuclear weapon which gives them the ability to do so, I don't think anybody should doubt the seriousness and the authenticity of their threats. If the Iranian regime have the ability to do it and they have the intention to do it, then we shouldn't say, well, maybe they'll just, it'll be a threat. No, we have to take them seriously. We have to take them at their word. And for the real possibility that they would use a nuclear weapon in a future war with Israel. That's their ambition.
How much of the operation now against Iran was timed because of what happened with how the Iranian regime was massacring their own people? We saw, for an example, I think it was between 30 and 40,000 people that got killed in 48 hours by the Iranian regime. How much of it was because of that, the timing of it, and how much of the timing was because of the imminence of them creating nuclear weapons, or was it a combination, or what was most important there?
So our assessment is, not just our assessment, also the American assessment, is that the Iranians, not deterred by the operation in June 2025, were acting to essentially take their nuclear program and their ballistic missile program underground as quickly as possible to a certain depth where really nobody would have been able to take military action and act against that nuclear program. That was why we had to act now. Because essentially once those programs are underground, then the Iranians are immune. They can work at their own pace to develop the nuclear weapons that they intend or threaten to use against us, and do it without any possibility for action. And that's why we had to act now. Of course, the massacre of tens of thousands of Iranians on the streets by their own people also gave it greater impetus. The protesters on the streets called for the Americans to act, to take action, because they knew and they know that it would be very difficult to do it by themselves without external assistance. Now, we cannot do that by ourselves. That's also not one of our goals, to make the regime fall. But if we can assist the Iranian people in their actions and their aspiration to do that, then we're trying to help them set the conditions for that. But ultimately, the reason to act now was the imminent nature of that nuclear threat, and the fact that if any more time was granted to the Iranians, who always return to the negotiating table in order to buy time, then we couldn't let that go on any further. And I should mention, the U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, he said just after the start of the operation, the starting point of the Iranians in the negotiations between Iran and the Americans was that the Iranians said, we have over 400 kilograms of enriched uranium at 60%, which is capable of producing 11 nuclear warheads. That was the starting point for the Iranians. Now, what do you do with that sort of threat? To go from 60% enriched uranium, which has no peaceful purpose whatsoever, to the necessary enrichment for a nuclear weapon is a matter of weeks. Once the Iranians would make that decision, they could break out and become a nuclear force and a nuclear threat within a very, very short time. And that's why it was necessary to act right now.
Because I've heard after that, I've heard different, I wouldn't say rumors, but different people speaking about there's still like 400 kilograms of uranium inside of Iran. And also new information from your Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. I think he said to a news outlet that now we have stopped the Iranians from both creating nuclear weapons and from creating ballistic missiles. Can you expound upon that?
Well, it's something that the intelligence community looks at and has to understand about what is the quantity and where it is and the ability to take it out of Iran. But certainly, what our Prime Minister said yesterday is that we have stopped, or we have destroyed the Iranians' capabilities, as you said, of producing nuclear weapons and producing ballistic missiles. He didn't refer to the enriched uranium itself, but we've certainly set them back already, and the operation hasn't finished. But we've set them back a long, long way. Now, if the war was to end tomorrow, and the Iranians decided we want to go full ahead, full force, and reestablish our nuclear program and our ballistic missile program, and waste whatever money is still left in the economy, then of course that is something that's possible. But they are also aware, if they weren't aware of it already in June 2025, we made it very clear that should the Iranians reestablish these programs, then we will take action to stop it, and that's what we've done. And I think they'll understand that those words they're not empty words. We will not allow the Iranian regime to develop a nuclear weapon, no matter what it takes. We work very closely with the Americans this time. If we have to act by ourselves, we'll do that as well. We cannot allow such an existential threat to be developed, either above ground or underground or anywhere that it's found. Every country has to defend its citizens, and that's what we're doing against the Iranian threat, against its proxies, against its various methods of working, both in Israel and around the world. Wherever there is that threat, we will take the necessary action to protect ourselves and protect our citizens and civilians.
It's interesting also with the dynamics between Israel and the U.S. How much of this is like a U.S. operation with Israel joining in? How much of this is actually an Israeli operation with the U.S. joining in? Because we also heard during this period of time until the operation launched, I think Trump said something like, "Hey, if you want to go ahead, then you got the green light. Just go ahead on your own." What is like? Can you tell us a little bit about the dynamics here? Who is calling the shots? Who's taking the lead?
Well, we are fully coordinated with the Americans, but this is an American-led operation in full coordination with us, with Israel. And we say there really is no daylight between the United States and Israel on this matter. Yes, Israel is the one that is faced with the existential threat from Iran, but it's clear that the Iranian threat is not just an Israeli problem, not just a Middle Eastern problem, but a global problem. And that's why it's so important to the Americans and certainly the current administration to take action and to prevent this threat. So the Americans are leading it together with us. But really, it's a level of coordination that I don't think has been seen before. And you can just look at the opening day or hours of this operation to see just how closely we work together. And we are a very strong alliance. And there is no alliance for us like the Israeli-American alliance. And this is the proof. This is the proof of it. And we will work together for however long it takes to remove the Iranian threat. And we're doing that well together, and we'll continue to do it well together. And that's what we're seeing on the ground and from the air, of course.
I listened to a very good Israeli podcast with Haviv Retigur, who has this Ask Aviv Anything. And he's talking about seeing this situation as two chessboards. It's not just one. He's talking about seeing this as a chessboard with an Israeli chessboard, with the playing field being, of course, Iran and the neighbors there. And that's one thing, but there's also a larger one with the U.S. and China, he says, and that one of the situation now is that Iran has put itself almost like a forward operating base on the chess game between China and the U.S., and the U.S. can't have that because he says that, for example, China was getting ready to deliver hypersonic anti-ship missiles to Iran, and the U.S. can't have that because that would put their vessels at risk at sea and those kinds of things. How much do you also see this as different kinds of layers and multidimensional levels?
Well, I think all these fronts are interconnected. And perhaps if we bring it closer to Norway and to Europe, the clear links between what is happening in Iran and what is happening in Russia's war in Ukraine are today clearer than they ever have been before. The same Shahed drones manufactured by Iran are targeting Israel and other countries in the Middle East. They're exactly the same drones that Russia fires at Ukrainian civilians. And even the Ukrainian President Zelensky said just a couple of days ago that there are more than 200 Ukrainian experts currently in the Middle East that are helping Middle Eastern countries defend themselves from Iran's Shahed drones. So after recent years where Europe and the world and the United States, of course, has assisted Ukraine in its war against Russia, now the Ukrainians are helping the Middle East in its war against Iran, because it's exactly this. It's the same conflict. It's the same war. And this is why it's important for me to emphasize that there's lots of discussions about whether European countries will join the current effort to protect the Straits of Hormuz against Iranian aggression. But this has been Europe's war for many years already, certainly since the start of Russia's war in Ukraine, but in many other ways as well. Iranians have been attacking, either directly or through its proxies, European sites for many, many years. Not just Europe, South America, Australia, many places. This war arrived in Europe a long time ago. And whether European leaders like it or not, they are deep, deep within this war. And you can look at the comments of some of the European leaders in the last few weeks, including the German Chancellor Merz, who talks about, well, Israel and the US are really enforcing the fundamental values of Europe, but that for too long, Europe has not acted to enforce those fundamental values. We have been doing, let's say, the dirty work for many years. And today, our actions in Iran are definitely going to keep Ukraine safer, because it disrupts Iran's ability to support the Russian war effort. And that's good for Ukraine, that's good for Europe, it's good for Norway, it's good for the free world. So all these issues, of course, are interconnected. And what we see in Iran is just perhaps the first front, but it's a multi-front war. And one of those fronts is certainly Europe.
Do you think China is an actor in this whole dynamics of what's going on?
Well, I don't think you can disconnect anyone. Certainly, there's also a lot of focus on China because of Iranian oil exports to China. And Chinese imports of Iranian oil essentially have kept the Iranian economy afloat for many, many years.
It's almost like 90%. I think they purchase 90% of Iranian oil.
Without those oil imports, the Iranian economy, which is already failing, would fail entirely. And that's something that essentially Iran is able to export relatively cheap oil to the Chinese, free from international sanctions. That puts the prices up for everyone else. And the world is rightly concerned today about energy prices going up. Many don't speak about the fact that for decades, there's essentially an Iranian premium on every barrel of oil. It could be 7% to 20%. There are different estimations. That because of the dangers or possible disruption posed by the Iranians in the Hormuz Strait, that's something that the oil markets have taken into account for many years, and therefore it puts the prices up anyway, long before this current operation in Iran. The day that Iran is controlled by a democratic government, which the world can trust, oil prices will come significantly down, and that Iranian premium will no longer be paid by all of us, by the companies, by the consumers ultimately. So this is really we hope, the short-term price that we have to pay in order to, the entire world will benefit in terms of energy, in terms of freedom, in terms of the lack of weapons that are being supplied by weakening Iran and its proxies. There are so many different issues, but they are all ultimately connected, and it's here also on our doorstep.
We have to talk about the Strait of Hormuz and what's going on there. Is this... my friend Ola Asbjørnnes, who also has an excellent podcast, he named this just the other day, this is not the war of Iran anymore, this is the war of the Hormuz Strait. How much is he correct in that, and how important is this for Israel and the US? And also, do you think Israel will be able militarily, together with the US, to take control over the Hormuz Strait?
I think what's important to say is that on the first day of this war, Iran made a clear decision to turn this into a regional war or even a global war in an attempt to put enough pressure on the global economy to bring this war to an end as soon as possible and for the regime to survive. And certainly the closing of the Straits of Hormuz was a scenario that would have been taken into account by both the Americans and the Israelis, and more so, it affects Asia, and it affects Europe, and it affects the entire global economy. It's a global issue. It's not just an Israeli issue or an American issue. And in fact, it's really a symptom. It's a symptom of what the Iranian regime has become. The timing of the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, of course, is in response to the American-Israeli operation in Iran. But it's not because of it. It's because the Iranians have a chokehold on a key channel of global energy supply. And what we're seeing now is the symptom of that. But what we need to tackle, and what we're trying to tackle at the moment, is the root of that problem. This is the symptom, and that's why when some European countries say this is not our war, it's incorrect. It is their war, and it will continue to be their war until the Iranian regime is no more. And if we think that the Iranian regime is capable of doing what it is doing today in the Straits of Hormuz with ballistic missiles, drones, and a pretty weak navy, or what is left of it, imagine if it was able to blackmail the rest of the world with a nuclear weapon. Then the negotiations and the ability to restrain Iran and its ambitions becomes exponentially more difficult. So that's why we have to see this as a symptom and really proof of the need to get rid of this regime, and the hope that the Iranian people will ultimately overcome it. And we're concerned about energy prices, and Norway is concerned about energy prices, and the entire world is concerned about energy prices. But if you look at the people of Iran, then the energy prices is not their most major concern. The economy there is in such a way, because of the Iranian regime's ambitions, that the Iranian people can't put food on their table. Inflation is 70%, 80% a month. It's not a matter of paying more for heating our homes and fuel. There it's their ability to be free at all, and that's where we must focus both on Iran's nuclear threat, its ballistic threat, and also what it has been doing to its own people for 50 years. And if this is the price we need to pay, then so be it. And we hope it's a temporary price in order to reach an Iran and a Middle East which is much, much safer. And then we will all enjoy the benefits of that.
But do you think militarily that the IDF and the U.S. military would be able to take control over the Hormuz Strait? I heard Trump speaking about maybe sending the USS Tripoli with around 2,200 U.S. Marines, maybe. They were speaking about that. Is the IDF considering the same thing, going into the Hormuz, taking military control?
I don't know about the operational objectives. That's something far above my pay grade. But certainly you hear the statements of the Americans and the need to secure the safe passage of ships through the Hormuz Strait, and that's a universal concern. And they are acting to make that a reality by weakening the Iranian navy and its infrastructure, its infrastructure, it's aggressive, its military infrastructure along the straits, and it is doing that, I think, methodically and systematically, and making sure that the Iranians cannot choke that key waterway, which is important for all of us. Ideally, the Americans talk about the fact that there needs to be a coalition, and it's the Americans who are leading that. But of course, it's a global concern.
Yeah, because the U.S. president, he was out saying that, hey, Europe should step in here and contribute, and we really like to see European warships going down there with us. Now, is Israel disappointed in Norway for not saying yes to Trump's request for help in the region?
I think this is a conversation that the Americans are having with their European partners, and we are neither part of Europe nor part of NATO, so you'll have to invite my American counterpart to ask that question. But of course, it's something that needs to be solved. And the Americans are working very hard to do that, and certainly we are as well. We are working, as I said, in close coordination with the Americans, and we have also targeted the Iranian Navy and its capabilities, because we look at the economic impact, but it's just another example of Iran spreading its terror across the world. And this is, maritime terror. We can talk about its terror in different places, but this is another symptom of the regime of terror that Iran has invested in and built over the decades.
Of course, we have to talk about Norway-Israel relations in all of this. Our foreign minister, Barth Eide, he was out, I think, the same day that this operation started, and saying to our major news outlets here that, hey, this Israeli-US-led operation is in breach of international law. He was very direct. What does Israel think about that?
Well, I should say the first statement of the foreign minister only referred to Israel.
Okay.
It didn't even mention the Americans. I don't know why that is, but of course, we are disappointed in the Norwegian response. And much of the Norwegian response focuses on international law. And international law is critical. And our operation in Iran is fully in accordance with international law. And I think this is worth discussing. Because Norway says, well, there wasn't an imminent threat. And there needs to be either an imminent threat or you receive a mandate from the Security Council in order to act in self-defense. Now, firstly, of course, there was an imminent threat. The Iranians have 2,500 ballistic missiles, which many of them are directed at our civilians, our cities, our population centers. That is certainly an imminent threat. But actually, it misses the point. And I know you've interviewed Natasha Hausdorff, yeah. And she's really a fantastic expert on everything to do with international law. But here, we have been in a state of ongoing armed conflict with the Iranians for many, many years. And it's within that framework that we are operating. Now, within that ongoing state of armed conflict, we don't have to justify our self-defense every time. Although we would meet those criteria, it's a different game. And within that ongoing state of armed conflict, we need to act in accordance with the relevant laws, which is proportionality and distinction, etc. And that is where we are. This is not the first time that we have been in a conflict with Iran. It depends how you take a look at it. If you look at the most narrow approach to it, we've been in an ongoing state of armed conflict since they fired 200 to 300 ballistic missiles at Israel in the middle of 2024. If you take a broader look at it, we essentially have been at war with the Iranians, or the Iranians have been at war with us since the revolution in 1979. And their wish and aspiration and actions to wipe us off the map. And Iran, if they haven't been attacking us directly prior to the recent escalations, then they have been through their proxies for many, many years. Hezbollah have been attacking us for many years. The Houthis also. This is not a new conflict, and that is the framework in which we are operating. And that in my conversations with government officials, I explained to them. We have been in a state of conflict with the Iranians for years or decades. It depends how you look at it. And that's where we are. So we're very disappointed, and we disagree with the Norwegian approach. We completely agree that we have to act in accordance with international law, but the starting point is very different. And that's why we disagree with the Norwegian approach here.
Is it almost like Norway interprets international law in a very different way than Israel does?
No, look, it's the same. It's the same international law, but I think you need to look at the statements from many European leaders who acknowledge that what Israel is doing is in accordance with international law. And that international law is perhaps insufficient to deal with cases such as these. And if we are talking about an imminent threat, then what does an imminent threat mean? Does an imminent threat mean that there is a nuclear ballistic missile on a launching pad in Tehran with I don't know, the address of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem on it before you can fly over and take it out? Because then it is too late. And the Israeli Prime Minister yesterday, as he often does, cites a quote by Winston Churchill. And Churchill is, he knew a few things about leadership in wartime. And he spoke about the danger of the slumber of democracy. And that democracies are in danger of waking up too late. And he talks about the jarring gong of self-preservation, and that democracies only wake up when the threat is already there and already realized, and then it is far too late. And he blames, he was speaking in the 1930s and appeasement policies, that we cannot wait, and we cannot afford to wait until that nuclear weapon is ready before we act. And as I mentioned earlier, that's why we have acted already, because we knew that the Iranians were working to take that nuclear program and ballistic missile program underground, and then nobody can touch it, and then it's too late. And we are not willing to wait until it is too late. As I said, we don't doubt the intentions of the Iranian regime. We think they're serious. We know they are serious, and perhaps. We should mention that this isn't the first time that Israel has taken action to eliminate a nuclear program. We did it in Iraq. We did it in Syria. I don't know how Norway responded then, going back a couple of decades. Perhaps that's something I should look into. But today, I think the entire world is thankful for the fact that we don't have a nuclear Syria, we don't have a nuclear Iraq, because that would have happened if the Israelis hadn't taken action. And here too, I think there are the condemnations, including by Norway. I think, I can't predict the future, but in a few years' time, hopefully with a different regime, if the Iranian people manage to overthrow their current oppressors, we will look back And we will say thank you to the Israelis and the Americans for taking the necessary action to prevent Iran from becoming nuclear.
Is it almost, you think, that the government here in Norway is like living in a lull of peace here in safe Scandinavia? It's difficult to relate to what it must be like living in a neighborhood where your neighbors want to kill you and doing everything they can, spending most of their national budgets on weapons and terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. Is it almost as if Norwegian governments the people here are unable to relate to it?
So I think I think that's possible. Although, as we said, the war is not that far away. The war arrived in Europe, either when it arrived in Ukraine, or the attacks just recently on British bases in Cyprus, or the attacks in Turkey. This war arrived in Europe a long time ago. And Norway, of course, has a long border with Russia. And the Russian threat is a real one. So perhaps it is difficult. But I don't wish, I've been here for 7 months, 8 months, and I think it's wonderful that Norwegians, especially Norwegian children, don't face the same threats and trauma that Israeli children face. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. You look at Israeli children who spend their days and nights in bomb shelters, whilst ballistic missiles, some of them cluster munitions, which are indiscriminate, are being fired upon their towns. And you don't know which one will hit you. That is a terrible, terrible reality. And it's a reality that the children who lived on the Gaza border, Israeli children lived on the Gaza border, have known for many, many years. Also, those on the northern border with Lebanon have known for many, many years. And I'm very pleased that in Norway it's hard to relate to the reality that we face in Israel. And I think that's a good thing. But, of course, it does lead to a certain, let's say, illusion of safety, because this war is not so far away. And that's what Churchill was talking about, the slumber of democracies, and waking up when it's too late. So, of course, it's difficult to relate to. But that isn't an excuse. Just because it's difficult to relate to doesn't mean that you can't take the necessary action and respond in the what I see as the correct way.
Yeah, because our foreign minister Barth Eide here in Norway is very quick being out condemning Israel whenever Israel does something, but I haven't seen him condemning Iran using cluster munitions to target civilians in Israel. Do you have a comment to that?
Look, it's something that has to be condemned, and condemned outright. Perhaps, I was pleased to see that Norway said it would follow the European Union when it came to the sanctions on the Revolutionary Guards after they'd murdered tens of thousands of their own people, together with the Besiege in Iran. But then for me, that asks the question: why doesn't Norway also treat other terrorist organizations that are designated by the European Union as terrorist organizations? The European Union designates the likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and many others in the Middle East as terrorist organizations. So, my question when it comes to the Norwegian government often is, why are the Revolutionary Guards sufficiently terrorists to treat them in such a way, but Hamas and Islamic Jihad and others are not? And the response I receive, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, is that Norway is in dialogue with these groups, and in order to be in dialogue with these groups, then we can't sanction them or act in such a way. But as has been published in the media and in the official statements from the government here, the Norwegians have a open channel of communication with the Iranians even after they sanctioned or said they'd follow the EU sanctions on the Revolutionary Guards. So my question is, why if Norway wants to play a constructive role in the Middle East going forward, then I think the starting point is treating those hostile forces in the Middle East as hostile forces and as terrorist organizations. Norway follows the Security Council of the UN when it comes to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. these are terrorist organizations in the same way that Hamas is a terrorist organization and that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. And therefore, we need to act in the same way that reflects that reality on the ground. And there can be no room for negotiations with these sorts of groups. These groups need to be destroyed because the Middle East can only look forward to a peaceful and positive future once these groups are no more, once they're history. In the same way that we didn't suggest, well, we should sit down with ISIS and negotiate with them. Also, there's no room for negotiation with the likes of Hamas. What can we negotiate with them that, they'll give up their genocidal aims, and rather than killing every Jew on the planet, they'll only kill half of the Jews on the planet. The same with Hezbollah. It's the same ideology. It's the same ideology, and it's not something that can be either negotiated with or they can be convinced through diplomatic means. We tried, and the Americans tried, and the whole world tried to convince Iran to give up its nuclear program diplomatically. And the Americans were trying it until just a couple of weeks ago. But repeatedly, they come in ill faith. They do not mean what they say at the negotiating table. It's about buying time so that they have finally reached their nuclear weapon. And we have to ask the question, when diplomatic means fail, then what do we need to do? War should always be the last resort. But it always has to be there as a possibility. If we're not willing to enforce what we say, then the negotiations don't lead anywhere. What happens if the Iranians are not willing to make any concessions and diplomatic means reach their end? Then where do we go? And today we're seeing the result. We're seeing the result of almost 50 years of diplomatic failure with Iran. And thankfully, we are stopping them in time before that diplomatic failure turns into a nuclear failure, because we see what happened with North Korea. We do not want Iran to be the same. Not that we don't want, we can't afford for that to happen. And diplomatic failures, we see it across the Middle East. We see it in the south of Lebanon, and we certainly see it in Iran. I mean, we cannot afford for that to continue.
Would you say that Norway actually has more communication with the likes of Hamas and Iran than it does with Israel?
Well, I don't know about that. But we would urge Norway to, Israel is a democratic country. It is a partner. It should be an ally of Norway. We share the same values. Our relationship should be, and we wish that the Israel-Norway relationship would be better, but that requires a change in approach from Norway.
Has the Norwegian government reached out to you to talk to you, to the Israeli embassy after this operation started?
Yeah, we have an ongoing dialogue. We have an ongoing dialogue with the Norwegian government. We have difficult conversations. We certainly have our disagreements. There is engagement. But my request when we have this engagement is that we need to ask questions about Norway's continued engagement with the terrorist organizations in the Middle East. And Norway has said that Hamas, especially after October the 7th, is a terrorist organization. What it did on October the 7th may have taken some time longer than it should to condemn it properly. But if Hamas is a terrorist organization, as it says, then we need to treat them as such. And only by doing so can we undermine Hamas.
Is it almost like the saying, like a friend to all is a friend to none?
Perhaps. Look, I think you'll have to invite representatives of the Norwegian government.
I'd love to. Yeah. I tried.
and ask them, is about this policy. Is it possible through conversations and dialogue to convince Iran to give up its nuclear program? As I said, the world has been trying to do so for almost 5 decades unsuccessfully, and it has only led to Iran buying time and really trying to lie to the world and convince the world that its program is only for civilian purposes. Now, nobody should buy this because the evidence shows that it has there's no civilian purpose for 60% enriched uranium. You don't need anything above 3.7%. As I said, so I return to my question. If diplomatic means fail, and the Norwegian government is calling on Israel to return, and the Americans to return to find a diplomatic solution. But perhaps there isn't a diplomatic solution with Iran, and if there isn't a diplomatic solution, certainly not one that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, then what needs to happen? And the answer of what needs to happen is what's happening today in Iran.
I remember your Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think he said in a speech, I think it was to the U.S. Congress, where he said that, I get a lot of flack and heat from these European leaders in their countries, like officially, but unofficially, they praise me for what Israel is doing, and they have a totally different response to you. Have you experienced that too? Is the Norwegian government speaking in a different manner offline, like when it's not on the record? Is there a discrepancy there?
No, I think I can't read the minds of the Norwegian decision makers, but I think your point.
Mossad can.
Well, perhaps, but I think your point is very true, and it's something that, especially we see in the Middle East today, is that I think if this Iranian regime is removed, and even if not, if the nuclear capabilities and the ballistic missile capabilities are destroyed, then everybody will be pleased about that. And certainly you see today in the Middle East that everybody sees today, I mean, they knew about it. The fears of all the Middle East countries were realized in the last few weeks. Iran has attacked 12, 13, 14 different countries, and they've targeted civilian infrastructure in most of these countries. All their fears have been realized. And perhaps they don't come out and praise Israel for doing the job in taking apart the Iranian capabilities. But I can be absolutely certain that behind closed doors, perhaps not in front of the public, but behind closed doors, they are very, very thankful for what Israel is doing. And it's interesting to look at what the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia said on Thursday. He was speaking in the Saudi parliament, and he said it's necessary to make a distinction between the American-Israeli operation and the threat that Iran poses, because the Iranian threat far predates what is happening today. And today, the likes of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, UAE, we're all united in facing the threat of the Iranians. And so, yes, of course, there is a difference in the discourse between what Arab states say publicly and what they say behind closed doors. And I think that the Middle East is going through a major shift at the moment, and what we will see at the end of this war, when it comes, is that the Middle East is more united than ever in its understanding of what unites us. And if it wasn't clear before, which I think it was, if it wasn't clear before, it certainly is clear now.
I'm reading this book called Rise and Kill First about Mossad operations, and isn't that an important, Israeli or Jewish principle when an enemy is coming to kill you, then rise up and kill him first?
Well, I think history has shown us the importance of listening to our enemies when they speak, and not letting these threats grow to an extent that I think it's underestimated just how dangerous the neighborhood is that Israel lives, and we are surrounded by countries or regimes and terrorist organizations that are truly committed to killing us, to killing every single one of us, not just Israelis, but also Jews. And if you don't rise up and eliminate that before they do so, then the results are clear. So of course there is no room for error. There is absolutely no room for error, because if you let these enemies reach their potential and achieve their goals, then the results are catastrophic. And we should be under no illusions about what those results can be. We saw it on October the 7th.
Could you almost say that is one of the main factors in the state of Israel's survival is because of the principle of rise and kill first, that you're able to take out these people, terrorists, states that has these intentions to take out Israel, that you're there in advance?
Of course. We saw it in the 6-Day War. We've been fighting for our survival since 1948, since the establishment of the state, and overcoming the odds repeatedly to overcome our enemies that were committed to our destruction. Today we have peace agreements or normalization agreements with some of them, not all of them, because they understand that today it's not their interest to try and kill us. Rather, it's their interest to live in peace. It may be a relatively cold, chilly peace. It's not necessarily a warm relationship, but they understand that coexistence or living side by side is better than trying to destroy us, because their people have suffered as a result of that. The Iranian regime is not there. The Iranian regime says, well, we don't care how much our people will suffer as long as we continue our ambitions to wipe the Zionist entity off the map. But the Middle East needs some brave leadership and leaders of Arab countries who are brave enough to come and say, actually, it's not in our interest to continue this forever war. We saw it with Egypt, we saw it with Jordan, and in recent years, of course, we have the agreements with the UAE and with Bahrain. And if any Arab country needs to see what are the benefits of establishing good relations with Israel, then you just have to look at the Gulf countries that have normalized relations and the benefits in terms of defense cooperation, economic cooperation. Those are the perfect case studies. It's not something that we need to explain anymore. You can see it in the figures and the data, just how beneficial it is today for the Arab world and Israel to cooperate and live side by side.
What do you think about what we saw as a response from Iran? Not that they were just firing at Israel, but also like firing missiles at Dubai and Cyprus and Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Like, what was that about?
Look, this is what Israel and the Gulf states and the Middle East have been worried about for many, many years. But this was Iran's deliberate decision that the way we survive this war and continue our terror activities around the world is by turning it into a regional conflict as quickly as possible. And that way we can put enough pressure on America and Israel to end it. But I think it's a major miscalculation, because rather than doing that, it has just proved both to the countries that have been attacked and to countries all around the world that this regime has only bad things to offer to the world. There is nothing positive about the Iranian regime, and that's never been clearer. And you see that in the number of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones fired at civilians in all of these countries. I think the Iranians do a very good job at uniting the entire Middle East.
Against them.
That's quite an impressive capability, because there aren't many who manage to do that. Not at this time, at least.
It's such a strange choice of strategy for the Iranian regime to have any hopes of anybody coming to their help. It's like, and they're firing missiles at them. You don't gain any friends by doing that.
No, of course. And really, the worst fears of these countries have been realized. We always knew it was a possibility, but that was the Iranian choice. This is how we try and shorten the war, by putting enough pressure on these countries, on energy, by attacking energy infrastructure, civilians, the Straits of Hormuz. This is the way that we try and choke the world and bring a premature end to the operation. And that's not succeeded. Rather, it's just helped the world understand the true face of this regime.
What are your thoughts about the Iranian civilians rising up and getting a new government, getting a regime change? Do you have hopes that will happen? What are your thoughts about that?
We hope. This is what the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, wanted to do in January, when they were willing and brave enough. And really, I think the Iranian people are certainly amongst the most brave in the world, that they were willing to go out night after night and face the bullets of the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij, because there was no worse alternative. So after almost 50 years of oppression and suppression, that we have to go out and change something. Now, today, the Iranian regime is at its weakest in almost 50 years, since the revolution. Now, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that the Iranian people will go out whilst the war is continuing and infrastructure, regime infrastructure and military infrastructure is being targeted, to go out to the streets and try and overthrow the regime. But I suppose when the war ends, then we will see. And the Iranian people have the best opportunity that they have had to date to go and essentially finish the job. And we hope for the Iranian people that's what they will be able to do. And a few weeks ago, you had Benny Sabti, who was a top Israeli expert on Iran, grew up in the first few years of his life he spent in Iran. And he speaks about just how unpopular this regime is. And internal documents in Iran saying that 92% of the Iranian people oppose the regime in Tehran. Now, their wishes are clear. When the firing ends, we will see whether the Iranian people are capable of and or wish to go out on the streets and do what they can to overthrow this regime. And it will require, again, a huge amount of bravery, because the techniques and the methods of the Revolutionary Guards and the besieged volunteers have not changed one bit. They will be determined to put down any opposition, just as they were in January this year, perhaps even more brutally. And I don't think anybody should make any mistake that the Iranian regime is just going to, fold up and go away and offer the Iranian people a better future. That is not what they want. All they care about is their own survival. But I really hope for the Iranian people. I think the entire world is united in its hope for the Iranian people that finally they can have a better future. But ultimately, it needs to be done by the Iranians for themselves, and that they will be able to do it.
Yeah, because I've spoken with a lot of military experts, amongst others like John Spencer and different people. A lot of them saying that you actually, for a regime change, you need boots on the ground to be able to do that, or of course by the civilians themselves. But boots on the ground, you can't really do it from the air with just aircrafts. Do you think we will see Israeli boots on the ground in Iran, or U.S. boots on the ground?
I don't think so. And as I said, regime change isn't one of the goals of this operation. But we are working to create the conditions for the Iranian people to take the future into their own hands. And I think that's right. From the air, that is not something that's possible, and also, as I said, it's not one of our goals. But rather, we are working to eliminate the nuclear threat and the ballistic missile threat. Regarding the future of the people of Iran, I think this is the golden hour. This is the time where they have the greatest opportunity to really change their destiny. But that doesn't mean that it's easy, and they are going to face, although a very much weakened regime, they will still have to face the regime that has managed to control them for almost 5 decades and will not be willing to let them go without a serious fight.
Would Israel be happy to see Reza Pahlavi as the new leader in Iran?
No, I think Pahlavi, he's well known to us. He's visited Israel in the past. I think he's a figure that unites many Iranians, both in Iran and outside of Iran. But it's not for us to dictate who will lead a future Iran, hopefully after this regime is gone. And that's something for the Iranian people to decide. But what we are certain about is that there is no worse alternative than what would have been if we allowed the Iranian regime to continue its current direction, which would have been to continue oppressing its people, but ultimately to continue developing its nuclear weapons. And then the ability for anyone to act in Iran would have been gone, and that's why we had to act now. the future of Iran, we are united in our hope, together with the Iranian people. And you know well the deep ties between the people of Iran and the people of Israel, and we have to always distinguish between the people of Iran and the terrible regime that controls them. And we are hopeful that one day, just as we did before 1979, that Israelis will be able to get on a direct flight from Tel Aviv to Tehran, and Iranians will be able to get on a direct flight from Tehran to Tel Aviv, and go on holiday and have business meetings and share technology and share this, because that's the aspiration of both peoples. Unfortunately, there is a regime that is committed to our destruction in Tehran, and it is really simple. This whole conflict is very, very simple. I think it's probably the easiest to explain out of all of the conflicts and the wars in the Middle East. The Iranian people want to see Israel destroyed. Israel does not want to see itself destroyed. That is it. That is the entire story of the last 50 years, 47 years of Iran and Israel. Iran's wish to wipe us off the map, push us into the sea, and our desire to stay on the map and not be destroyed. It's that simple.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how much wonderful stuff could come out of this if you have a regime change. I'm just thinking like how much of a super high-tech collaboration you could see between Tel Aviv and Tehran. It could be like the main leader in high-tech for the world, like a global superpower.
Sure.
The collaboration between Iranian civilians and Israeli civilians.
Yeah. I mean, this is long-term thinking. Firstly, our hope is that the Iranian people manage to, break free from these chains of oppression, and that they are free to do what they want and free to dictate their own future and their own destiny. After that, we can talk about direct flights between the countries. But firstly, just that the Iranian people who have suffered for so long will be able to end that suffering, and they will be led by a government that cares about them and invests in them, rather than cares and prioritizes building tools of destruction with the money that they have. That's my wish for the Iranian people, and I think we're all united with that wish in Israel.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about what we've seen in attacks towards the synagogues worldwide after this operation started, and both Michigan, Detroit, Toronto, Netherlands, Belgium, a lot of countries. How concerned are you in Israel about these global attacks?
Of course. It's a major concern, and it's not just a concern for Israel, of course. Only a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, the Australian government decided to expel the Iranian ambassador to Australia because Australian intelligence had discovered that Iran had been behind 2 attacks on Australian synagogues. And there are multiple layers of this fear. Certainly that Iran directs these attacks by itself or through its proxies or networks, or that there are individuals who are either inspired by Iran or funded by Iran or by other terrorist organizations that ultimately take responsibility. And today we've seen, and it's nothing new, but it's certainly escalating, that every Jewish institution and even every Jewish person is a legitimate target in the eyes of Iran, its proxies, and similarly minded Islamist terrorist organizations. And you said, there is a long list, and that's just in the last few weeks. And then, if you go over the last 2.5 years since October the 7th, then the list is much, much longer. And that is something that every country, the communities, of course, are worried about being a target. But that every country has to understand it cannot be complacent and underestimate the risk that is posed to its Jewish communities, because today no Jewish community is safe, and it's a terrifying reality. But what encourages me is that Jewish people around the world aren't giving up on their faith. Rather, it makes their faith stronger. And they said, well, you're not going to succeed to intimidate us. Yes, it's scary. And yes, we have to be careful. We may even pay a price in terms of the lives of our own community members, but we're not going to go and hide away. And we shouldn't hide away behind fences and armored doors and armed police, which is the reality for many Jewish communities. But we're going to go to synagogue every Saturday. And we're going to go to synagogue on Friday nights and to celebrate our festivals and double down on our faith. Because if we don't, then we're only letting the likes of Iran and its proxies and terrorist organizations succeed. And we cannot allow them to have that victory. Look, this isn't the first time that Jewish communities have been under attack. Jewish communities and Jews have been under attack for centuries and thousands of years. It's the anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred, and it's the one that mutates more frequently and easier than any other. So as I said, there is no room for complacency. Not here in Norway, not in Europe, anywhere in the world, I do give credit to the Norwegian authorities that they take this matter and the protection of Jewish communities seriously in the forces that they put outside, the police forces that they put outside the synagogue in Oslo, in Trondheim, and you see the rapid response as we have seen in recent weeks when there is a suspicion of something. But at the same time, we have to remember that threat or the potential attacks is a symptom, is not the problem. The problem is the anti-Semites within Norwegian society. And I think the mayor of Oslo is very clear in her comments that she repeatedly states that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a problem for Norwegian society. Jews are, either the symptom or they're at the end of the chain. But to fight anti-Semitism in Norway, we have to fight it for Norway, not just for the Jews, not just to keep the Jews safe. We have to fight it for Norwegian society and for the good of Norwegian society. And today, I think we see that's more important than ever.
And also how important it is to see that anti-Semitism is not the problem of the Jews. It's not like you talk about anti-Semitism and you start to think like, oh, what's wrong with all these Jews? Why do people hate them? It's like the wrong way to see it. You have to look at what's wrong with these anti-Semites. Why are they hating on a group of people?
Correct. Jews are and have been the scapegoats for many, for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And the reasons develop and mutate, and there's always a reason to hate Jews. And today it's easier. It's difficult. You can't go around the center of Oslo or Trondheim and say, or any other Norwegian city for that matter, and say, Jews of our streets, we hate Jews. Jews go home to, I don't know, wherever they think we come from originally. We come from the Middle East, but it is easier today to say, Zionists off our streets, or we hate Zionists, or we hate, Israel, or we hate the IDF, because, that's much more acceptable. I often, in conversations that I have here in Norway, refer to, there's a famous picture from Oslo in the early 1940s. It's written on a shop front somewhere in Oslo, which says, Jews go back to Palestine.
Yeah.
And today, many anti-Semites say, Jews, get out of Israel, go back to where you came from, which is, I don't know, Poland or wherever. My family half came from Syria and half from Poland. But and then you realize that actually the problem isn't, where Jews are. It doesn't matter whether we're in Israel, whether we're in Europe, or whether in the Middle East or America or Australia. The problem is that we're Jews. It doesn't matter where we are. And there'll always be a new excuse or a new reason to hate us.
The problem isn't where we are, but that we are.
Of course. It's our very existence. And that is what really, annoys those that hate us. Not only that we exist, but that we defend ourselves. And today, more than 75 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, we're able to defend ourselves in a way that was never possible in the past. And we can dictate our own future and our own destiny. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing the result of our investment in our own security, to ensure that we will never be slaughtered again in the same way that we were just in recent history and during the Holocaust. That today we are capable of defending ourselves. And there's nothing that annoys the anti-Semites more than that we are proud of our Judaism and that we are able to defend ourselves in a way that was previously non-possible.
And that we won't put up with it. It's like we're done with putting up with it, done with being oppressed and hunted and killed. I think it's so powerful to see that meme on the internet where you have this picture of young Jewish women during the war, and then underneath it you have a picture of young Jewish women in the IDF. Like, this picture annoys a lot of people that they'd rather see us as the top picture during the war.
Of course. I think there's also a lot of power in the images that we've seen recently of Israeli female Air Force pilots who are taking action in the skies of Iran in the hope that the oppressed women of Iran will be able to free themselves from this terrible regime. And that one day, the women of Iran will be able to take off their forced headscarves if they so wish, and be able to, really be proud of their own identity in the same way that Israeli women are, and where there is no limit and there is no glass ceiling. That's very meaningful, very powerful.
And I think it's very beautiful to see that connection between Israelis and Jews and Iranians now in the situation after January, where I've gotten to know a lot of Iranians and to see that we are actually in the same boat. Like, we are in the position that we have to defend ourselves from this crazy regime, and they are also, because most of them don't want that regime and being oppressed in the same manner. So we're actually in a very similar situation.
Definitely. We're two ancient peoples with rich, proud histories. And of course, there have been different, history has taken us in different places. But today, we're united in that one hope. And I think when you speak to Iranians, including here in Norway, and you had Mahmoud Farahmand here in this seat just a couple of weeks ago, just how clear we are, both sides, in our hope for a better future for the people of Iran. And you see it in the streets of Oslo in these really large marches and demonstrations. That there's very little that divides us. The only ones that divides us are the leaders, the current leadership in Iran. But still, throughout the last 5 decades, that friendship between the Iranian people and the Israeli people has remained very firm, very strong. In fact, it's become much stronger because that longing for a better future is something that unites us and has united us ever since.
I have to also ask you, when we're speaking about this anti-Semitism, because I wanted to ask you about this horseshoe phenomenon that's going on, especially in the U.S. with far-right actors such as Tucker Carlson. He had a podcast recently, a week or so ago, that has been talked about a lot because he's bringing up like the argument that, Israel is pulling the levers here. They dragged the U.S. into this war. This is not our war. Like, actually just ancient anti-Semitic tropes that the Jews are behind everything. What are you concerned about this? It's not just the far left that is being anti-Semitic now, but also the far right is joining them in this horseshoe mechanism?
Absolutely. It's a horseshoe. And I know there's these conspiracy theories that are nothing new about the Jewish lobby and Jewish power, and it's straight out of the elders of Zion. It's real, medieval conspiracy theories. Often the Jews are either seen, and we have been seen through history, both as the weak who are trying to undermine society, and also we're seen as the strongest who manage to control society. So you can attack us whether we're weak or whether we're strong. If anyone thinks that Jews or Israel is capable of dragging the United States into a war, I don't think anybody drags the United States into a war. I don't think anybody is able to convince the United States president that he should go into a war. This is a superpower, and the Americans make decisions in their own interest to defend their own people. and not because of some, because of either Jews or the Jewish state. It really is pure anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And it's something that we see. You see it from the far left and you see it from the far right. And the horseshoe is absolutely right. There's very little that divides them when it comes to, when it comes to Jews. And we have to be conscious of both, and that attacks come from both places. It's not necessarily new, but I think perhaps the rise of social media means that there's a lot more of a platform for these extreme views to be platformed and to be aired, and that's where you see just how close they are.
Also, I had journalist Kjell Erik Eilertsen on just the other day, and we were speaking about Norwegian aid, how much money we're funneling to different countries. And what surprised me is that Norway has actually been giving money to Iran since 1979. Actually, when a lot of countries stopped giving money to Iran, that's when Norway started, after Khomeini came into power, and we're still giving them money. What do you think about Norway funneling money down there?
Well, I think Norwegian citizens have to look at the direction of Norwegian aid. Ultimately, it's your taxpayer money that's going to all these organizations. And I think it's becoming increasingly clear, especially after the ceasefire was signed in Gaza and the needs for reconstruction and rehabilitation, that the giving of money without receiving the receipts can't continue. This time, when Gaza is rebuilt, we have to make sure that money goes to the right places, and it goes to building above ground. It doesn't go to building below ground, and that it only gets into the right hands. And this is why I think we're very disappointed by Norway's decision to double down on its funding to the likes of organizations like UNRWA, which has a serious systematic issue with the infiltration of Hamas terrorists within its ranks. Now, the UN plays an important role in conflicts all over the world, and including in Gaza, and we work with many UN organizations to make sure that what needs to get into Gaza goes into Gaza, and humanitarian aid has continued throughout this war in Iran, with different security measures to make sure that everybody is safe in doing so. But UNRWA specifically has a serious problem with infiltration by Hamas. It is part of the problem, it's not part of the solution. And there are other UN organizations that we have absolutely no issues with, that can do the same important work because they do the same important work all over the world, in different conflict zones. So, that's where the efforts should be focused. We need to make sure that humanitarian aid, which is incredibly important, goes to the right hands, so it gets to the people that need it, and not put it in the hands of those who only exploit it and use it for terror, for its own purposes, to keep its regime going, because that's what we see repeatedly in the Middle East.
Yeah, because money can be wonderful, right, if it's used for good purposes and constructive purposes, but it can also be dangerous if it actually goes into the wrong hands and making them able to build tunnels, buy weapons, terrorism. Because I was really surprised and shocked that Norway went from we gave 667 million Norwegian kroners to the Palestinian Authority in 2022, and then 2023, you'd think that would go down, but that actually doubled to 1.2 billion Norwegian kroners. It's like, when you look at that in the context of Norway recognizing Palestine as a state, it's almost saying like, here you go, thank you Hamas for October 7th, here's a state, and a bonus, we're going to double down on the support. So here's 1.2 billion Norwegian kroners. What's your response to that?
Right. The question is, where does that money go? The Palestinian Authority has many issues, but it is also deeply, deeply corrupt. And in addition to being deeply corrupt, it also pays salaries and stipends to the families of Palestinian prisoners who have murdered dozens, hundreds, thousands of Israelis.
Pay for slay.
Together. Pay for slay. Pay for slay. That's where the Palestinian money goes. And how do we guarantee that money is not going to the hands of the families of terrorists? That's what Norwegian citizens should be asking and must be asking those questions, because it's not just an issue for us as Israel. It's an issue for Norwegian society, that the money, that your taxpayer money that you pay every month, does not go to supporting terror. It does not go to supporting organizations that, the leaders of those organizations line their own pockets with that money. And it certainly doesn't go to malicious actors, either Hamas in Gaza or elsewhere, to make sure that they can continue their regime of terror. Because we see it repeatedly. We see it repeatedly that money that is donated by countries across Europe in Gaza is used for ultimately Hamas infrastructure, that they abuse and exploit schools that are built with European money donated to UNRWA, that Hamas builds tunnels under UNRWA infrastructure, including their headquarters, in hospitals, everything that the important money goes to, and the money is certainly important and needed, that it goes to the right hands. Because otherwise, the conflict is perpetuated, and what Norway and European countries and countries all around the world should not want and should act in order to ensure is that money does not go to perpetuating the conflict and the ability for the likes of Hamas or the Iranian regime to continue its aspirations and promote terror, either in the Middle East or in Europe, for that matter.
Yeah, because of course Norway would say that, no, we only give this money to the Palestinian Authority and we never give money to Hamas. But how much does that assure you? And is it possible to say that there's a hard line between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas?
Well, look, if you take the Palestinian Authority by itself, it has so many deep problems. I know there were questions asked in Parliament regarding incitement in the school books of within the Palestinian Authority schools, and these textbooks are full of incitement. You can see extreme examples online of, I don't know, how do you teach maths in a Palestinian textbook? If you kill one Israeli and you kill another two Israelis, how many Israelis have you killed altogether? And essentially those questions in Parliament were dismissed, and that there's been a review and a reform. But actually, when you look on the ground, that incitement to terror and the support for terror, or the incentivization of terror, continues. Maybe the methods are slightly different, but the Palestinian Authority has not stopped for one moment. So, of course, serious questions have to be asked about where does that money go, and how do we ensure that it doesn't support terror, essentially, because it's a Norwegian interest. Norway doesn't want its money going to support terror or support organizations that support terror. So what is Norway doing to make sure that doesn't happen? That's the question.
And we're going towards the end of the conversation. I'm going to have to ask you at the end here, what do you think about the case of Terje Rød Larsen and Mona Juul, as has been revealed in the Epstein files? Mm-hmm. We read about the archives from the Foreign Ministry showing up in his basement, and the reason I'm asking is that they were central to the Oslo agreements and being a part of that. How do you view that situation?
Look, I think this is a question for Norway, really, because it concerns the Norwegian Foreign Ministry and Norwegian Public Service. What emerges from that, I think really it's a domestic matter more than anything. I read the news reports, and like everyone else, but ultimately, it's what happens within the Norwegian Public Service. So it's not really right. It's not right for me to comment on that. So I'll let you ask your other Norwegian guests.
But what could be relevant from it is if that has corrupted the process of the Oslo agreements, with there being some corruption in there, and how important was the Oslo agreement and the process around that for Israel?
No, the Oslo Accords was a major agreement, and you see the consequences of it today, for good and for bad. But more than 3 decades have passed since then, and today it's important to look at where the Middle East and the Israelis and the Palestinians are today. What is the reality on the ground? And then you can ask how much the Oslo Accords is relevant today to what is happening today. Let me put it this way, and it still appears on the website of the Norwegian Foreign Ministry, because Norway is very proud of the Oslo Accords, in the Oslo Accords, and as I said, it still appears on the Foreign Ministry website. It talks about that issues such as the recognition of a Palestinian state. These are final status issues that need to be solved by the two parties around the negotiating table. Now, as we know, in the start of 2024, the Norwegian government decided to recognize an independent Palestinian state, which is not a matter that was settled by the two parties around the negotiating table. So I wonder, Norway sees the Oslo Accords as very important, and is part of its legacy in the Middle East, but at the same time takes an action which entirely negates the premises of what should be the final status of the two parties in the Middle East, the Israelis and the Palestinians. So perhaps that's another question for when you invite your Norwegian government official here. On one hand, Norway is very proud. At the same time, its actions to recognize a Palestinian state unilaterally goes against the very essence of the Oslo Accords.
Eytan, thank you so much for that you came here, and I wish you a good weekend and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much, and let's hope for more peaceful and more stable times in the Middle East, for Israel in the Middle East, and really for everyone.
Indeed, and for the Iranian people.
Certainly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.